Morning, everyone. Warm welcome to us all on this Sunday morning. Now, to be fair to Shen, I didn't speak to him beforehand. I didn't want him to click over, but as I said, didn't speak to him beforehand, so I kind of lost the opportunity through my unpreparedness. But as you can see, this morning we're talking about gluttony, and it can be quite a sticky subject to speak about. Not talking about sticky date pudding, but it's a topic that can sometimes cause offense to Christians and to certain brethren, obviously, that enjoy the finer things in life, if we can put it like that. And I was thinking about how do I introduce this topic. Now, as I said, I didn't know who was doing the pointing until it was too late, so I didn't get a chance to stop it. But something that came to me while preparing this lesson is, I wonder if a preacher stood up with a cigarette in his hand and delivered the lesson while smoking, if anybody would take offense to that. And if this was perhaps a lesson about whether or not smoking is a sin, how would that lesson go down? And of course, as we all know, smoking is not mentioned in the Bible. There's nowhere in the Bible that talks about smoking being a sin. However, it is a universally, if I can call that as a generalization, accepted that as a Christian wanting to live a good, healthy life that looks good from the outside, I think a preacher standing up with a cigarette in his hand would certainly cause concern amongst many brethren. I think that is fairly safe to say. And while that may be a fairly safe thing to say, there's nothing in the Bible that talks about smoking as being anything right or wrong about it. The Bible does have a lot to say about gluttony. And so as I talk about this topic, I ask you not to take offense. I ask you to listen to what I have to say, listen to what the Bible has to say, and you make up your mind as to how you are living and the choices you are making, and whether or not you believe it is in line with the scriptures that we look at this morning. So we are looking at the book Plain Bible Talk by Ken Butterworth. So a lot of the framework from this lesson comes from him, not all of it, to be honest. I found his particular framework around this topic very, don't even know what the right word is, maybe monotonous for lack of imagination on my part, in the sense he really kind of drummed one point home literally through about 15 different points. So I decided to go about it a little bit differently, but a lot does still come from this book, and obviously all of our lessons over the last probably year now have come from Plain Bible Talk. And also, as a sigh of relief maybe to some, 2 more lessons. So from next month, we're going to be looking at a different topic. So the purpose of this morning's lesson is to learn more about the forgotten or the ignored sin of gluttony. The purpose is to expose gluttony for the sin that it is. And the challenging thought is, when last have you heard a sermon on gluttony? In fact, perhaps even the question is, have you ever heard a sermon on gluttony? I have heard a few in my whole Christian life. So in 2.5 decades, I've probably heard 2 or 3. But certainly I've heard a lot more lessons on love, perhaps, or marriage, or divorce, or adultery. Not very many on gluttony. Another challenging thought is, when have you studied this for yourself, perhaps? When have you yourself looked into what gluttony means and how it perhaps applies to your life, and what are the decisions you're making to challenge yourself to live according to the principles of the Bible with regards to gluttony? So gluttony is a sin. It is a lack of self-control. Gluttony is not based on some magic BMI number. So for those of you who may not have ever heard of BMI before, it stands for Body Mass Index, and generally what those quote-unquote in the know say is, if you are so tall and you are so old and you divide that by your mass or your weight, you get this number, this ratio, and that determines, according to, again, generalization, where you sit as to whether or not you're underweight, the right weight, overweight, obese, or they have another one, and then some of them is morbidly obese. So another great truth is, but we're going to look at that. We're going to talk a little bit more about this a little bit later. Obviously, you can't, I don't think, personally, you can go past a lesson on gluttony and not look at that side of it. So we will look at that a bit later as well. And the last of the three great truths is it does matter how much and what you put into your body. So, looking at some of the key scriptures, so in Hebrew, I'm not at all a Hebrew scholar at all. So apparently, Graham could probably correct me a little on this. I don't know how good his Hebrew is, but Zalel is that word over there. For those of you who read Hebrew, if that's wrong, I'll blame my Bible software. But apparently that is the word used for glutton or being gluttonous in Hebrew. And the good thing about Hebrew is it's still a real active language that hasn't undergone a lot of changes over the years. So I think I touched on this a bit later, but that word has remained largely unchanged over the 3 to 3.5, perhaps even 4,000 years of the Hebrew language. So some scriptures we'll look at is Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 18. There is a rough logic to the way and the order I've got these verses up. So if you would like to turn and read with me Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 18 through 21. We read, "If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and when they have chastened him will not heed them, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of the city to the gate, and they shall say to the elders of the city, 'This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of that city shall stone him to death with stones.'" So the word glutton there. In Proverbs, we read about this a few times as well. Excuse me. So we'll start off with Proverbs 23, verse 20. "Do not mix with wine bibbers or with gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and drowsiness will clothe the man with rags." In chapter 25 and verse 16, a couple of chapters over, "Have you found honey? Eat only as much as you need, lest you be filled with it and vomit." So in Jeremiah now, there's a slightly different word that's used when Jeremiah is prophesying in this particular passage, or at least when God is encouraging Jeremiah, I should rather say, because that's the context of this reading. So in Jeremiah chapter 15, verse 19 through 21, "Therefore thus says the Lord, if you return, then I will bring you back. You shall stand before me. And if you take out the pious from the vile," so that's the word there, from the vile. "If you take out the precious from the vile, you shall be as my mouth. Let them return to you. You must not return to them. And I will make you to this people a fortified bronze wall, and they will fight against you. But they will not prevail, for I am with you to save you and deliver you, says the Lord. I will deliver you from the hand of the wicked and will redeem you from the grip of the terrible." So understanding that context, let's just jump back to the last bit of verse 19, or the middle bit at least. "If you take out the precious from the vile," so that word vile there in the New King James Version. I did look at what the other translations say. It's not coming to me now. So similar, the other translations don't use the word glutton or anything like that. It's literally that word vile or base, I think is maybe one of them, or dross maybe. So you get the idea. And another one I want to look at just in terms of a principle of this idea of what we eat and drink is Daniel. So I'm fairly certain we all know the story of Daniel, and especially his beginnings, which is what we're about to read. Oh, sorry, it didn't come up. Daniel chapter 1 and verse 8. So Daniel, when he's before Nebuchadnezzar, and they're putting all these feasts before them, we see that Daniel had decided in his heart, in verse 8, "Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested the chief eunuchs that he might not defile himself. So there, Daniel understood that there was a way that he was to conduct himself, and that included what he ate. So just a principal verse that I threw in there. But to go back to that Hebrew word then for glutton, there is two ancient senses or meanings or definitions of that word that have a similar principle woven through them. And just to further on to that, as we come to the more modern day sense, so sort of from about 1.5 to 2,000 years ago, that latter sense that we're going to look at, that word where it's used as vile, that's kind of washed away. That word in today's Hebrew, it's only that meaning glutton, overeater with no control. That's what's remained. So that's how it's used today in Hebrew. But in the ancient sense, there are two meanings. So the first one is to eat greedily, to be a glutton. We see that in Deuteronomy 21 verse 20 and Proverbs 23:20 through 21. So that's that word there. And then the other sense or meaning is what we read in Jeremiah, to be cheapened, to be degraded, to be made worthless. And that comes from the idea that you have so much excess that you're just now wasting. It's of no use to you. It's of no benefit to you. It's just an absolute waste or a redundance of what you already have. There's no sense to it. It's what exactly we see there. It's worthless. And so Jeremiah in what we read earlier in 15 talks about he will remove the vile from the precious. So that idea of removing what cheapens something, what degrades something. So that's why I said some translations may have dross or base, to take it away so that all that's left is that which is precious. And in Lamentations, we'll just read that one. Lamentations, not Leviticus. So Lamentations chapter 1 and verse 11. All her people sigh, they seek bread. They have given their valuables for food to restore life. See, O Lord, and consider, for I am scorned. So I think it's that last one there. Scorned. Made worthless. Degraded. Okay, so historically related. This is kind of what I said. I jumped ahead of myself. Wasteful, indulgence, lack of discipline, becoming worthless or degraded. So because of your access, what you're now using or have in front of you is of no value. So the modern Hebrew has kept mainly that word to gobble food or to eat greedily, to be a glutton. The second sense that we've looked at has moved away. It's not used that much in Hebrew anymore. So some New Testament scriptures about this word glutton. So Matthew chapter 11 verse 19. Jesus is speaking, and he says, the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they said, look, a glutton and a winebibber, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is justified by her children. Philippians chapter 3, verse 19. We're going to look at these words in a minute as well. We're just getting some context here of this idea. What did I say? Philippians 3:19. Whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame. In Romans chapter 16 and verse 18, we read another passage about this idea of stomach or eating too much or gluttony. So in Romans chapter 16 verse 18, for those who are such do not serve our Lord Jesus Christ, but their own belly, and by smooth words and flattering speech deceive the hearts of the simple. And the last one we'll look at for now is Titus chapter 1 and verse 12. So Titus chapter 1 and verse 12. One of them, a prophet of their own, said, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. So those are the words that are used, when we're going to look at those words now, throughout the New Testament to bring about this idea or this principle of controlling your belly, controlling your desires, controlling your lusts. So, the first one that we'll look at is phagos. Now, phagos is a noun. It literally means the eater or an eater. So, someone who eats. The verb form of that word is phago, and that's what is always used when you read about anybody in the New Testament eating something, fish, bread, whatever. When you read that they eat, it's that word phago. So phagos is literally just the noun version of that word. So you're calling someone an eater, someone who eats. A ferocious man or a glutton is I think it's, Thea uses that in the Greek English lexicon to describe this word, this noun, phagos. And that's the only two times that it's used, actually. It's used of Jesus by the Pharisees, and they falsely accuse him of being a glutton because John came, as we know, in the desert, eating very little, fasting a lot, really separating himself from the people, and Jesus came to be a savior for the people. He came really to actively seek and to save sinners. And so he engaged with people at the people's level, but not their moral level. So he welcomed all to him that he could teach them truth. And so because he did this, because he was seen to be going into their houses and enjoying meals with them, he was called a glutton and a wine-bibber. And we know both of those accusations to just be the Pharisees' attempt to derail his name. So the only two passages that word is used is, ironically, by the Pharisees to malign the name of Christ. And I suppose what we can take from that in one sense is this was meant to be, in the context of the day, an insult. It was not a good thing to be a glutton. The Pharisees weren't saying, look at Jesus, this glutton and wine-bibber, to hold him up on a pedestal. They were trying to bring him down. So it's never throughout all of history been something that you would want to be called. Okay, so the next word is kilia. It's a slightly broader term, and it is most often actually used metaphorically. So its literal translation is belly, stomach, or inner cavity. And as I just said, it's often used metaphorically. So Philippians chapter 3:19, which we read, is, their God is their bellies. So in other words, they are driven by their physical needs instead of controlling their physical needs. And then the other word that is used in Greek is gaster, which, as I'm pretty sure you've picked up, this sounds like gastro. So gaster. So that's used far more anatomically to actually mean the stomach or the womb. Only once is this used metaphorically, and that's what we've just read in Titus chapter 1 and verse 12, where it says, talking about the Cretans that are always liars, evil beasts, and lazy gluttons. That's the only time it's actually used metaphorically. Every other time that word is used in the New Testament, it's talking about either a pregnant woman or an upset stomach or a large belly. So, gluttony. To look at it, what it actually just means, if you just go to an English dictionary, I just picked, whoops, where did I go? Oh, there you go. If you just look at, I just used Merriam-Webster. So it just means to eat excessively. Excessive eating or drinking, greedy or excessive indulgence. So gluttony, in terms of a sign of the times, is really becoming a topic that is quite taboo. It's kind of making a resurgence to a degree. You see a lot of, I know for myself coming to Australia, seeing a lot of the advertisements on, fat and what you drink and what you eat, that wasn't yet going through and doing the rounds in South Africa. So for us to come across and just see that so actively being taught through advertisements, that was, quite encouraging to us, that this idea of becoming healthier, living a healthier lifestyle. But it seems almost like it's become this topic that's taboo. You don't talk to people about what they eat or drink. It's kind of one of those things you just let them, it's their own truth, it's their own body, just let them do what they want, unfortunately. It's a topic that has been preached on, but let's restart that bullet point. It is a topic that has been preached on since the Torah, since the law, right? And when Moses delivered the law to the people, as we've read in Deuteronomy, it's this idea that you are to control your stomachs, you are to control your children, what they eat, you are to raise them properly. So it is something that has gone all the way back since the beginning of time. An example of what I'm trying to make by that bullet point is, for example, homosexuality. People, if you say, no, you have to be a man and a woman, heterosexual, that's the way God designed us, you're old-fashioned. But they don't realize that this old-fashioned principle has been around since Sodom and Gomorrah. All right, so homosexuality, gayism, that's not new. People like to think it's new because it makes you sound wrong when you preach what God talks about. But actually, this idea has been around from the law of Moses. So it's the same with gluttony. We like to think that this is maybe a taboo topic, or it's a new fad, or everyone's on a health kick. There's all these gyms popping up. Well, actually, being healthy, eating healthy has been around right from the law of Moses. All right, Evagrius Ponticus. If you've never heard of him before, neither had I. But in doing my research and looking up about this idea of gluttony, I became aware that gluttony is one of the quote-unquote 7 deadly sins. So who's heard of this idea of the 7 deadly sins? I know it's embarrassing to put your hands up, but if you can just, yep, okay, good, a few hands going up. So I'm glad I didn't make that up. I mean, I didn't think I did, but there you go. So the 7 deadly sins really come from, let's see if I can see it without spoiling the surprise, Pope Gregory. Pope Gregory I, he was the one that made this famous in around 400, 500 AD. He put together this list of the 7 deadly sins. Now that actually came originally from this guy, Evagrius Ponticus. He was a Christian monk in the late 4th century, so 370, 380. He was the most active in and around the Egyptian area. And he was served under under Cappadocian fathers, the Basil of Caesarea, Gregory of Nyssa. If you know any of those names, I don't. They're just there for the clever people amongst us. And he was ordained within and I'm going to quote this quite loosely when I say mainstream unified Christian church. So the Catholic Church was still under the original Greek word for Catholicism, which is, I think it's Kathologos, or something like that. And it actually means one universal church. So the word Catholic in the 80s and 8150s, right up really till the 400s, it actually meant the one universal church. And he was under that. So I'm not saying he was true or a faithful Christian in any sense of the word, but he was not, the point I'm trying to make is he was not operating under a pope. He was not operating as a Roman Catholic, as, for example, Pope Gregory was, who made the 7 sins famous. And he put together the original list of 8 deadly sins. Right, and so this is, how big did that come out? Not at all big. So he put together this, the 8 deadly sins that you see on the far left, your left as you're looking at the screen. And then John Cassian, who was Latin, he put it, semi-streamlined it a little bit, added 1 or 2 things. And then ultimately, Pope Gregory in the late 5th century or mid-5th century, he then made it the most popular when he streamlined it down to 7, and then it became like a Catholic doctrine. But the point I'm trying to make in all of that waffle is gluttony is the top one on all 3 lists. It was never changed, it was never altered, because even right back as far as we can see in terms of this list, of this human list, it was recognized that gluttony is not good for the man, for the soul, for the human race. It's not good to eat more than what you need. It's not good to give in. It's not good to give in to your fleshly lusts and desires with no control whatsoever. So with regards to gluttony, let us consider, for example, the prodigal son. So embarrassingly enough, I always just thought the prodigal son was a cool title for a cool story that Jesus told, and we didn't really know what to call him, so we just called him the prodigal son. It was probably only about 15 years ago that I learned, oh wait, prodigal actually means something. and it's characterized by profuse or wasteful expenditure. Right? That's what prodigal means. Profuse or wasteful expenditure. And so this son was characterized by the fact that he did not control himself. He did not look after what he had. He did not steward diligently that which he had opportunity to use. And so he was therefore known as the prodigal son. And we know that it brought ultimately his wasteful use, his greed, his gluttony, his desire to fulfill his fleshly desires brought about his ruin. And you know what? This is not a huge surprise. That is exactly what Proverbs teaches about those who are gluttonous, about those who are wasteful. So we know about the prodigal son. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 29, verse 25 through 27, a passage that was read before all of my sports days that I went to as a child. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it. And everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. In other words, disciplined, controlled, moderated. It is all done with purpose. They do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we do it. What do we do? So they are temperate, so we are temperate for an imperishable crown. Therefore I run not with uncertainty, and I fight not as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection. So that's the opposite of being gluttonous. That's the opposite of being wasteful. It's considering what am I doing and how is it serving, honoring, ultimately bringing glory to God. And then last thing I want us to consider is general health. So I said I would touch on this at the beginning. So we have here what's called the J curve, apparently, of risk by BMI, and this is from the World Health Organization, as well as from the National Center of Biotechnology Information, and also a lot of the data comes from the Lancet Diabetes and Endocrinology website. So if you're a doctor and smarter than myself, I'm sure some of those will be completely natural and normal to you. Really, the ones that I know about is the World Health Organization. And not on here, which we're going to look at a bit later, is also some of the government organizations. So as you can see anyway, the point of this is that as you become overweight, you eat too much wheat, as you become overweight, your risk of mortality basically grows exponentially. And I don't think we should be looking at this and saying, oh, well, great, the more overweight I am, the quicker I go to heaven. I think it should be along the lines of, the more overweight I am, the less of an example I am to other people. I know personally, whenever I have looked at or heard this particular lesson in my life, there's one particular person that comes to my mind. Obviously his name I'm not going to mention, none of you would know him anyway, but really good guy, really grounded guy, in fact even a preacher at a church, but it constantly comes up about this guy's weight. He's probably about the size of this pulpit, and I'm not even joking. And it's just it detracts so much from everything that he is and could offer. And it's just so sad. I know he's been spoken to in the past, and I'm not going to go in because I don't know, to be honest. But the point I'm making is that it's what people see when they look at you, for exactly the same reason that you would be very unimpressed if I stood up here, lit a cigarette, and say, okay, let's get into this morning's lesson. Doesn't matter what I'm teaching on. I could teach the most brilliant lesson on love, the most brilliant lesson on Christianity, on the sacrifice of Christ. I could really bring it home, the power of God. But if I'm doing all of it with a cigarette in my hand, I would suggest to you that your focus would be far more on the smoke coming out of the cigarette in my hand and keeping your distance from my smell when I walk off the stage, if I can call it that, than what you would about anything I had to say. And so the same with gluttony is, if you are that person that people just see, taking no care of yourself and your body, it becomes very hard for you to be an example when that's the first thing people see when they see you. So the cardiovascular disease by BMI category, according to a study found on a USA government site, so you're more than welcome to go there and check that. just call it 200,000 people were examined in person. So this wasn't an online thing. This wasn't a, fill out your own survey. They were studied in person and analyzed. So for those who had a BMI of 25 to 29, which is generally seen as moderately overweight, men were 1.25 times at a higher risk of cardiovascular disease and women at a 1.32 higher risk. When you were obese, so 30 to 40, men 1.6 times, 1.7 times, and women at 1.85 times higher risk. And morbid obesity greater than 40, men 3 times more likely to have a cardiovascular disease, as well as women 2.5 times more likely. Now, I don't want to, what's the next slide going to say? Okay. And I don't want to go past this by saying that BMI, as any doctor worth his salt will tell you, is a gauge. I think according to the BMI metrics, if I'm to be completely honest, I'm in the minor obese, slightly overweight category. So that gives you an idea of what the BMI gauge is, and it's based on a whole different thing. So most doctors will do your BMI reading and then tell you, okay, this is your BMI reading, but we think this. So I don't want you to focus on the BMI. I don't want you to take out of this lesson, oh, I got to go home, do my BMI rating, because if I'm over 29.367, Quentin's saying I'm going to hell. I don't want you to take that away from this at all. I want you to take away from this lesson that we need to think about what we eat, how we eat, and what it shows people about ourselves and our control, and also that we need to be disciplined and controlled in the way that we live our lives with the other lusts that are out there. John 2 or 1 John 2, 15 through 17 talks about lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, pride of life. Ultimately, these are the things that we need to keep in control. Gluttony is just one of those things that kind of fall into the lust of the eyes category. Similarly to a large degree that, the love of money is the root of all evil. No, that's not what it says. The love of money is a root of all evil. So it's something that contributes to the way to the way we live our lives and the decisions we make because of what it can do, because of what it could possibly do. And this topic certainly falls into that same remit, that same principle of how do we control ourselves, how do we present ourselves to the world, and how are we looking after our bodies that we have. So yes, some people are born with hormone imbalances. Some people are born without natural abilities or tendencies to do or want or need certain things. Children are born with, I suppose it doesn't matter if you're an adult or a child, you're born the same way, so I don't know why I said that. But, there are exceptions. We understand that. We're talking about the average, general, normal person called to God. Are you living a life? Are you making decisions that reflect your desire to please God and to do the best that you can to invite people to his calling? So let us consider some of these passages. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 20. For you were bought at a price, therefore glorify God in your body. So that's obviously what I'm wanting to look at there. Glorify God in your body. As much as you can, as much as you are able to, glorify God in your body. In the next book to the Corinthians, chapter 6 and verse 16. Where's verse 16? Oh, it's here somewhere. And what agreement has the temple of God with idols? So you are the temple. You are the temple of the living God. So we are the temple. We are in some way, shape, and form, probably beyond what we can truly grasp, but in ways that we can grasp as well, we have the Holy Spirit within us. We should be looking after ourselves in that regard. Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual or reasonable, I think is a better translation in that one, your reasonable act of worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by the testing, so that by testing you may discern what the will of God is, what his good and acceptable and perfect will of God, or in this translation, sorry, I'm confusing this and the New King James translation as I try and get through that. Another good verse, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31. If you're still there, you can turn there, but either way. So whatever you eat, whatever you drink, whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Whatever we do, and interestingly, it specifically mentions eating and drinking, do it all to the glory of God. And I suppose a bit unfair to emphasize that point on this verse, because really the context is about not offending people by what you eat. But I don't think I'm stretching it too far by suggesting that we do watch what we eat and what we drink, because whether it be meats, whether the context be relevant to us today in terms of food sacrificed to idols, I think far less so today. It certainly is. I have heard, for example, personally, many times people will look at someone and say, oh my word, did you see what they dished up? Did you see how much they dished up? Did you see how much they eat? Etc. So let us think about what we do and how we do it, and whether or not it is glorifying God and serving the church. So, the challenge. The challenge for us, what I hope you get out of this is, first of all, to be satiable. So, satiable literally means to be capable of being satisfied or to be appeased. So, we've all heard about, rulers or the greedy or the power hungry being insatiable in something. Obviously, insatiable is the opposite of satiable. Let us be satiable. And Paul teaches that same thing. Whatever circumstance I'm in, I've learned to be content. Let us be content in our circumstances. Let us be satiable. Let us be able to be appeased, to be satisfied, to be happy with what we have. One thing I did like about what Brother Ken Butterworth put forth, he asked the question, well, how much is too much? And he kind of used this analogy. If I put $1 million on the table for any woman who walked through, or man that walked through the door dressed modestly, he said, how many people do you think would get it wrong? What is modest? What is immodest? But if there's $1 million on the table and you walk through the door and people thought you were dressed modestly, you were going to get that $1 million, I don't think anybody would get it wrong. If I offered $1 million for anyone who walked through the door with a neat, respectable haircut, I don't think anybody would get it wrong. Everyone would walk through the door, pick up the $1 million, knowing that the haircut was neat and respectable, or they wouldn't, because they would know that, well, this is probably on the side of out there. And so the same principle, if we put on the table $1 million for everybody who ate a reasonable amount of food with a reasonably balanced diet, I don't think anybody would get it wrong. And that's why I said earlier, what's the magic? There is no magic BMI number. It's doing what is right within the context of the situation that you find yourself. Let's not be gluttonous. Let's control our bodies. Exercise self-control. We look at Galatians. I probably should have put verse 23 in there because that's where it's specifically mentioned. But Galatians 5:22 and 23 talks about the fruit of the Spirit. And in verse 23, it specifically says faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. All right? So we should be controlled. We need to exercise self-control. And I don't think it would be fair to look at this topic and not just touch on at least fasting. Fasting may not necessarily be commanded by God. It's not thou shalt fast twice a week. And there is no necessary example of the disciples or the apostles or the early church fasting on any sort of cycle or regular basis. But we certainly know that they did fast. In Acts chapter 13, verse 2 and 3, when Paul and Barnabas were chosen, the brethren prayed and fasted and sent them on their way. Much later on from that, in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 5, couples are advised to take some time to pray and fast together. So, while obviously the exact opposite of the topic of gluttony, I did just want to bring it in because it's also something that's not spoken about a lot, but I've probably done it 2 or 3 times in my life. I don't think I do it enough. But I think it's something that we should, as a church, just be aware of, taking some time to really focus our minds again on God, and that can be done through fasting. So just as a side note on the challenge under the point of gluttony, I suppose that would be the opposite of gluttony. But to close off for this morning, let us think about what we eat in the physical now sense of the word gluttony and the commands given by God. But even further than that, let us consider what the way we conduct ourselves and our thoughts. I often think of Jesus when he looks at do not murder. He doesn't say, okay, well, just go out and make sure you don't kill anyone. He says, okay, well, what is the heart of that command? The heart of that command is even loving my enemies. He meditates on that command and thinks, what's the best I can do in fulfilling this command? The best I can do is not committing murder. The best I can do is actually loving the people that I would, by the standards of the world, I'd want to perhaps murder. I want to love them. That's fulfilling the command. And so when we look at gluttony, let's maybe have that same approach. How can I be a Christian, a person that models the intent of this thought and control my mind and, in this instance, to a large degree, my body, that ultimately all that I do, whether I eat and drink, I do it to the glory of God. Thank you very much. That is all I had for this morning. We'll close in a word of prayer.